You all, this is Laura. You know her as Laura Story, but I think people at her church know her maybe by another type of Laura. So, when did you get married before or after the Blessings came out?
So I got married before Blessings, but I had already been doing music as Laura Story. So Indescribable had come out as I was Laura Story. Okay. And so we just kind of kept it at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to sit down, and Laura, if you can tell them what you're doing now, the capacity you're serving in your church, and really, we just want to hear you talk. Anything that comes out of your mouth, it's going to be gold. And
no. You, Marcus, you got to ask me questions. You okay. Told me you were gonna shoot me some questions, but I can definitely do a little bit of an intro.
Okay, you do a little intro, and then students, let's think of the questions we want to ask. Okay, all right. I'm gonna have a seat and turn it over. I feel I'm doing a 360 here. So, all right.
Well, first of all, it really is a privilege to get to speak to you guys, and man, seminary. Whether you're college, where do I start? So I grew up at a church, First Baptist Church, Spartanburg, South Carolina. And not only did I sing in their kids choir, I was in their orchestra. And so I have such a respect for music ministers, which is why, I have joined the ranks here and become one. But for me, that was both how I learned music as a kid, as well as how I learned who God was. I think about the sermons that I I distinctly remember curling up in my mom's lap and sleeping through the sermons. Don't tell my old pastor that. Well, I'm sure he saw me. So I feel like it was the investment of the music. So I'm always reminding music ministers of that, because it's the songs that we pick are forming people's view of God. They're showing people who God is. They're showing people how to approach God, kind of how we worship and what we sing talks about the purpose of the church, the purpose of a Sunday morning gathering. So where you're not the preacher at your church, you're part of that spiritual formation in a major way. So as a kid, I bounced around in different colleges, ended up landing at a school called Columbia Bible College in Columbia, South Carolina. It was a small non-denominational Bible college, one of those where boys and girls couldn't hold hands. Are y'all at one of those kind of schools?
But okay. I actually grew up in Irmo, so you know where that is.
Oh yeah, I know exactly where that is.
Then, okay, I think we've got our camera angle fixed. I'll come back over here. Yeah. So Columbia International, now it's university.
Yeah.
It's a really great school, but it's a little more conservative than Texas Baptist College in South.
It's not like a Bob Jonesy place, which is also a great school. Right. It was a little that was what we would always say. We're like, yeah, sure, we have to be in our dorms by 11 o'clock at night, but we're not Bob Jones,
But Bob Jones is up in Greenville, South Carolina. Any of y'all familiar with that school?
Yes.
I don't know about now, but when I was younger, we always talked about Bob Jones had the stick rule.
Yep.
The stick rule is that students could date, but they could get no closer than they could touch opposite ends of the same stick as they crossed campus. They couldn't hold hands.
Yes.
It was the stick rule. I'm telling you, that's a reality.
That is the honest to goodness truth right there. Yeah. So I went to a small Bible college, and then at the time I was writing songs. I was leading worship at different churches, and I think that the phenomena of like the worship artist was kind of starting as I was finishing college. This idea of we'd always had itinerant speakers, evangelists or whatever, but this idea of itinerant worship leaders was kind of becoming more prevalent. And I'm not I don't say this to knock that, or maybe I do. Maybe I do. I did that for a few years, and then I realized that I truly have no business writing songs for the church if I'm not invested in a local church.
Amen. Amen.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I don't say that from a self-righteous place. I say that as I don't know how any person can remain holy. I don't know how any person can remain whole. I don't know how families can exist, can continue to exist without fracture apart from the local church. So I had just written, this is kind of a funny story, and then I'll try not to tell too many stories. I'm gonna stay on track. Here we go. I had, when I was in college, wrote a song called Indescribable, and I had a friend that was my agent, meaning I had a friend that lived in Nashville that knew a couple of people. It wasn't like anything too fancy, and he had begun to kind of share the song with different people, and honestly it really wasn't going anywhere. And I remember it was right around graduation, finding out that this worship leader from y'all's neck of the wood, a guy named Chris Tomlin, that he had heard the song, wanted to record it, and really, so before I did any recording or anything, I was just a songwriter, and so I graduated and thought, well, maybe I should keep doing this traveling, playing at different churches thing. But a church here in Atlanta, Georgia, contacted me, a church called Perimeter, and said, hey, we're Presbyterian, but we really feel like having a female worship leader on staff would be something that we feel like God's calling us to do. Would you be interested in coming? And I grew up Baptist. I wasn't sure really what all that meant, but anyway, I came to Perimeter. So it's been almost 18 years, and this is where we've been. It's been the base of ministry. So I did my graduate work at Covenant Seminary, that is our denomination's seminary, and then did the doctoral work at a place called IWS that Marcus is familiar with. So yeah, that's the beginning of the story. What else? What else can I tell you about?
Any questions anybody has? All right, before I start coming up with some things. All right. Yes, go ahead.
So growing up in a more Baptist background and then working in a PCA church, how did you navigate some of the issues like baptism and being in a church with a secondary disagreement like that?
Yes, that's a great question. I think what I would focus on maybe is the secondary part of that. And you guys every single one of you is going to need to you're going to have to figure out what your deal breakers are. You look at the church as a whole. When I first came to Perimeter, when I was looking at a PCA church, Southern Baptist and PCA looked about like this to me. And then as I began to look at other churches, closer, that they began to look to me in the sense of issues like the inerrancy of Scripture, issues like the
Does someone need to mute their mic? Okay.
Things like the need, the need for Jesus for salvation. It's interesting as someone that travels around to different churches. I find myself often in places that I'm thinking, I don't even know how, I don't even know how we got here. So the baptism issue, especially as a 20-something-year-old, not even knowing whether or not we would have children, it wasn't as big of an issue for me. Honestly, it's still not a hill I would die on, but because of the love I have for the church, the love I have for the community, it's one that I would definitely say that our family has decided that we're okay, that we can see it either way. I don't know if that answers that question or not.
No, I think so. There's some other curiosities that I maybe they have if they knew they had them. What's the general attendance at your church?
We have right at about 4,000.
Okay, and how many services?
We have two services in our main venue, and then we have a sanctuary, looks more like an auditorium, and then we have two other venues. So it's a multi-site church all on the same campus. I know it sounds a little bit crazy. We have a chapel, and they get the same sermon piped in, and then a student venue. So student venue is a little more it's hard to explain the differences because the style of music really isn't that different. But it's a smaller.
It's in Sunday morning simultaneous with the other services.
Yes.
So it's not like a Wednesday night.
What we found is that everyone wants to go to church on Sunday morning around 10:45, and our venue isn't big enough for them. Right. And so, I want to clarify that because it's not that we're having multiple services to meet multiple musical preferences or stylistic preferences. It really is that we can't all fit in one room, and so we're spread out a little bit.
So I wanted to get that as a frame of reference because now I'm thinking about from the standpoint of being a worship pastor, having to be the human resources person to staff the team and for all of these different venues all the time. So, do you have certain teams that are dedicated to certain venues?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we have the privilege of having a fairly large staff. I would say that our staff is, if you were to say what's the main characteristic of a staff member, it would be a volunteer equipper or a facilitator, because we really want for a church our size, a lot of churches our size go with all paid players. Nothing wrong with that. We would rather employ staff that are great at training volunteers. So even if we have a guy come in, my greatest goal would be that someone would come and volunteer with us, and that they would leave 5 years to like this, let's say they move with their job or whatever, and they can honestly say I became a better drummer, or I became a better vocalist from spending time at Perimeter Church. So yeah, but all the logistics stuff, we have someone who is in charge, a worship leader who works in tandem with what we would call a worship pastor. So a lot of the pastoral responsibilities of, they'll do a pastoral prayer. They'll be the one that does the call to worship. They'll do the benediction, things like that. And then just the sermon itself. So it's kind of three. In the sanctuary, there's the worship leader that leads the team, the worship pastor that does a lot of the, I say liturgical things, but we're not like super high church. And then the teaching pastor for that day. Okay.
Ugo, I think I see some questions that have popped up in the comments. Could you
Yes, I can. This is Johanna. I'm sorry for butchering it. Can you please share about how you started songwriting and how your approach to songwriting has changed over time? Yes. Well, I never really set out to be a songwriter or an artist or any of these things. My background is I took piano as a kid, played string bass in orchestra at school and orchestra at church. But I think that how many people you had some sort of band or orchestra background? When I say band, I mean like not the cool band. Like well, I think that not only helps us, interact with our volunteers well, but I think it helped in songwriting as a whole, because you just you're able to see how all the parts fit together. And so I started, my first song I wrote, I was probably 19 years old, and I was in college, and had joined a band, and the band wanted to record some music, and I had never even really tried to write songs. And I've always been someone that I would say I have a good ear and I have a decent voice. And that's been something that, I had to really work through with the Lord to say, okay, you're going to give me these songs, but you don't, I'm not like the Christina Aguilera. I know that's an old reference. I'm old. That's why I make old references. I'm not the kind of person that can do all the vocal acrobatics, but I always feel like the Lord, the reason I say that is because where I've kind of landed with it is the Lord has given me the voice that is sufficient to deliver the messages that he's placed in my heart. And so it's not, when you listen to one of my songs, if you were to listen to one of my songs, you wouldn't be like, oh, her voice is amazing. Hopefully you would hear the truths. Every song I've ever written is about pretty much the exact same thing. And it's, how do the promises of God intersect with my real life? And probably the most well song, other than Indescribable, the most well song I've written is a song called Blessings. And I wrote it it was about 5 years after my husband had been diagnosed with a brain tumor and had gone into the hospital and spent what we thought was going to be a couple weeks in recovery after surgery. Ended up being about 3 months, and he was discharged. And we realized that we weren't going to go back to how things were before, and that he had some pretty substantial disabilities because of the tumor and because of the surgery. And I tell you that not as a downer during your class, but at the time, sorry, I am answering your question. I promise. I'm just going around it a different way. So kind of the timing of all of that, there's a record label called Fair Trade who has a Nashville group, really great group. And we had been talking because they had heard of me also because of Indescribable and because of Chris. And I was about to sign this deal with them, and they were going to come down to Atlanta and we were going to have dinner. And 2 days before they were coming down to bring the contract and everything, Martin was diagnosed with a brain tumor. And so just the timing of that was interesting, where, I had to say to them, this isn't going to work. And by the way, I had been at my job here at Perimeter for about 5 months. So all this stuff was intersecting, this record deal and songwriting deal, this brand new at a church trying to figure out what is worship, how do I lead a team of people. I was in my 20s. How do I lead a team of people that are older than me and more mature than me, better musically than me? And then all of a sudden this brain tumor thing happens. And the reason why I tell you all that is I kept on pushing off the label deal. Like, they kept on coming back, and I kept on saying to them, let's wait till things get more stable with my husband. And finally, after maybe 6 to 9 months of continuing to talk to them, basically what they said was, we don't want someone to write songs whose life is all together. We don't want someone to write worship songs kind of after the trial has been resolved. One of the reasons why we think that that now is a good time, and they weren't pushy about it, but they were basically saying, you're relating to God in this hard season in a way that we believe that it really meets the congregation where they are, and that's kind of the place we want you to write from. So that's kind of how I started. I know that's not really a technical answer, but I did want to mention it because a lot of times the very things that we think will disqualify us from ministry, they actually end up being exactly the thing that the Lord wants to use if we just let him.
Wow, that's a great word.
I have a question. What is your process in songwriting? Like, do you start with the lyrics? Do you start with the music? Does it change
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm kind of all over the map. When I was younger, I would just wait for inspiration. Like I'd be hiking up a mountain and have this thought, and that happens every now and then, but not as much. I don't know if you can see, I have a tag along today that's watching Finding Nemo in the background. He and his 3 siblings keep those inspirational moments from happening. Okay, let's just be honest about that. Can I get an amen? Okay. And so for me, it has been more of a discipline, but not in a bad way. And so especially with us having 4 kids, I realized songwriting, it's just not just going to happen. So what I did, sorry, let me answer two ways. Sometimes for me, it's music. Sometimes it's melody. It's lyrics. Usually I start with lyrics. And a lot of time I've always been kind of even with those. And so usually if I'll have a lyric come to mind, there's usually at least a melody, or even a cadence idea, if that makes sense. Like I can think of the cadence in which I'm wanting to sing them, even if I don't have the exact notes. But one of the things that I've learned in later years is that I need the accountability of a writing group. So I have 2 different writing groups. One is a group here at my church that I pull together the worship leaders, and we'll do a recording. We'll record a few songs about once a year. It's fun for our volunteers because they get to, do the studio thing, and we're not trying to, like, I always say, we're not trying to be famous. We're just trying to be faithful. God has given us some good talent here, given our worship leaders some great ideas, and it's always a great, even if it's a not so great recording, it's always sweet for your church to get to sing songs that have been birthed in your church. So I have that group. Also joined a couple years ago. Keith and Kristen Getty have a songwriting group with I had mentioned Matt Boswell earlier, a guy named Matt Papa, Jordan Coughlin. Anyway, I could mention a bunch of people that are part of that. And so like we'll get together next week in Nashville for a week. And so today, before I got to jump on with you guys, I was, wrestling through all my papers, looking through my journal, going through my phone, trying to find the memos, and collecting the song on my whiteboard over here is all the songs, that picking which ones I want to share, which ideas I want to share, circling back up with people. Hey, did we ever come up with a chorus for this? And the reason I tell you all that is it really is nice having that accountability, but also that pressure where, in some ways, like the Lord's not in a hurry to have one of my songs. It's not like he's like, oh, what are we going to sing on Sunday if Laura doesn't write something? But it really is, it's anything that you're doing for the Lord is worth doing it well. And that goes for your Sunday mornings. That goes for your songwriting. That goes for all of it. Did I answer it?
Yeah.
Anywhere close?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let me say one more thing. Co-writing can be one of the most like intimidating things, and it's like anything in your walk with the Lord. When 2 people are kind of grappling over an idea, there is sanctification that happens there. As individuals, as songwriters, I cannot tell you how great co-writing is. Just having another voice in it. Yeah, it feels like you bring like your precious baby and someone like smacks it in the face. That it can kind of feel like that at times, but you just have to try to come with your ideas, hold them loosely, and then also ask the Lord for a sense of when you should change it, because they're like, oh, have you tried this? And when you should say, I really think I'm just going to keep going with the idea I had. Okay. Do you have any advice for how we can help cultivate a deeper love for the local church and our worship teams? I'm trying to think. So cultivating a deeper love for the local church and our worship teams. One great way is an album. One great way is just, yeah, one of the, it's not really a slogan, it's just kind of a phrase that we use a lot around here. We talk about aiming, like we're holding a bar of excellence in a community of grace. So we prize excellence, because it can be hard when you're running a worship ministry and you have the sweetest little, piano player that's just not able to play with the click, like things like that. It can be so hard to like, we're finding we still need to hold that bar of excellence, but we always do it in a community of grace. And I think the best thing you can do for your people is to obviously treat them as parishioners over instrumentalists. Because what we find is that you have the ones that aren't as good, that are really feeling bad, feeling undervalued, that you just have to pour in love into them. And then there's the ones that are really good, but they've literally never had a moment in their life that they've been seen for anything more than their gift. And so it's like even a different conversation you have with them of, man, it's so great to have you here because you're a phenomenal electric guitar player, but that's not why you're part of this community. You're a child of God, and we just love being with you. I don't know if that answers the question or not. I'm gonna go to the next one. How about that? James Music, Morris Brown College in Atlanta. Oh, see, James and I could have gotten together. Y'all could have come to it next time. Y'all come to Atlanta. Church music production students who are also songwriters have recently formed a writing group to share ideas and receive feedback from each other. So hearing you speak about this is helpful. Yeah, I'll tell you this, forming writing groups in your church, at your school, and then doing things like this. And there's a ton of people out there that wouldn't mind just jumping on Zoom with you to encourage you. There's also with Getty Music, and there's other places that do this as well. They have like a hymn collective that you can send your hymns in, and they'll give you and not that there are other people that are doing this that aren't just hymns, but you can send your music in there and they'll give you feedback. And so, yeah, a lot of great ways to do that. All right. More questions.
Chloe,
How have your, I don't know if she can hear me.
can you hear okay?
I can, yeah.
Okay, awesome. How have your like theological studies at Covenant and IWS most impacted what you do day to day at the church or with the writing teams and other ministry settings?
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. Okay. Here's I'll answer it kind of a sideways way. So I serve at a church, and so I have the church hat that thinks a lot about the lyrical content of the songs that we're doing. And then I have this whole other life where I do concerts, speak at women's events, visit radio stations. I don't do as much of this, but I was writing songs for radio and things like that. And so if you were to ask me, how does my theological training fit into that? One of the trends that I've noticed is you have contemporary worship, church music, the things that we sing in our church on Sunday morning, and then you have Christian radio. And a lot of times these things can intertwine in a helpful way, but I've seen a lot of negative that's happened from that kind of bleed over, specifically radio, into the church. And not because there's anything wrong with radio. I love Christian radio. But when you think about the goals of Christian radio, as someone who has visited, probably every Christian radio station there is, they will tell you their goal is to be positive, family friendly, uplifting, and encouraging. I mean, yeah, you're thinking about the tagline even as I say it. And it's great. There's nothing at all wrong with that. That's wonderful that we have that. But you can see how when music that's aiming for that, when it becomes the prominent music in our churches, rather than having Christ-focused songs with dense, like with biblical lyrical content, instead we have services that are uplifting and family friendly and positive and encouraging, which is again good, but not what God has called us to as a church. So I'd say my theological training has been the most helpful in, I mean, yeah, there's all the hermeneutics, all that stuff that everyone's doing, and as someone, a whole other part of my job, getting to lead Bible studies, getting to lead discipleship groups, and that's just who I am as a believer. I'll always be doing that. So my education, obviously informing all that, but even just in content in the worship service, that I can look at the top however many CCLI songs, and I don't say, hey, let's do this because apparently they're popular. You know what I mean? Or this song was a huge hit on radio. Our people know it anyway, and they've been asking me to sing it. But even having that conversation with them of saying, just because you're singing it in your car and meeting with the Lord there doesn't mean that that's what God's wanting us to do in worship. One of the, I can't remember his name now, but there's a golly, I can't even remember the name of this book. Don't want it. But here's what he said. Someone somewhere said this. How about that? He talked about sometimes in worship, we approach God giving him the gift that we would want, rather than looking at his word and figuring out, okay, God, how would you have me worship you? What should worship look like according to your word? Not according to my needs, not according to what I think worship should be. So yeah, that's probably how my theological training has informed my worship leading. But even more than that, it's about song selection. Song selection is a huge part of it.
I have a question. What type of songs do you feel like we need more of in the church? And then in your writing, have you noticed like different seasons for your own church of like needing more songs of adoration or more songs of thanksgiving or confession? Have you like noticed kind of like seasons for your church?
Oh, that's really good. I love that you're even talking about seasons of your church, because it really is. That's one of the things that makes y'all's job so important. Is you're balancing the biblical ideals for worship with what you know to be true of your congregation and what you would be singing, if you're in the midst of a devastating loss in your church, or is going to be different than what you would sing if you just had a new building and there's this excitement, But so there's a guy named Lester Ruth. I think Marcus, you're probably from. Is he at?
Yep.
I think he's at.
He's
Duke.
at Duke now.
He's at Duke.
Yeah.
He used to be our history professor at IWS.
Oh no! Oh yeah. Okay, I thought you were saying he used to be there. No, so Lester Ruth is he's interesting because he's in the worship field, but he's like a data analyst, and this guy is legit. But one of the things that he did, it's been a few years. I'm trying to think of exactly which book you could find this in, but I'm sure you can find it if you just look him up. But he did a study comparing the top 100 songs on CCLI for the past 20 years. Okay. And he matched that with the content of the Psalms. Okay. So matched basically our hymnal per se with Israel's hymnal that's been included in the Holy Scripture for a reason. And so he had a lot of observations. Where he said that we were doing well was adoration, praise, which all of you guys know that. one part that he mentions that if we're looking at 25 to 30% of the Psalms being lament, but maybe not a single CCLI song being a song of lament. Trying to figure out, okay, and even as I say this to a bunch of people that are you're like, well, I'm not gonna do it. Like, I would lose my job if I start my service with this dirge, But figuring out what does that look like, especially in a culture that people are grieving things personally, as a nation, and so it may not look like doing all these super somber laments, but when you have a tragedy like we've seen in Turkey this past week, is there something that we'd want to sing during, or some sort of lament song? Because there's not a ton of great lament songs out there right now, but there are a few, and there's a few old hymns even that really tap into we worship God, and even figuring out like the difference in confession and lament. And you guys probably know this because you're Bible students, but confession being real sorrow and repentance over our sin, and there were that was another category that Lester points out is not represented very well and basically, and just to clarify, CCLI isn't just here are the song, like here's a list of songs. This is what the contemporary church is singing, and so it's actual data. But confession being I'm sorry over my sin, lament being I'm sorry over sin, like just acknowledging the brokenness of kind of where we all are in that creation, fall, redemption. Just the fact that God is going to come and make it right again, but we don't live there yet. We're just seeing little pieces of that. So yeah, those would be, sorry for the long answer, but those would be the areas. And we have to be really careful how we sprinkle those types of things in. Oh, the other thing was, the other thing that he said that he did not see very much was believers singing to each other, which I thought was interesting, or believers singing to themselves. You think about the Psalms, lots of Psalms from David about singing to his own soul. Yeah.
This class has gone faster for me than maybe any other one that we've had. We've got time for like one more question, and then because we're supposed to be done at about 20 after, and I need to. Oh, you get another one?
No one else has one.
Okay.
Online or anything.
All right. Because then after we say bye to you, Laura, students online and in person, I need to say a couple things to you before we dismiss. So
he has to clarify all the heresy that I just.
No. Well,
it's I get that all the time, Marcus. It's okay.
Well, what's really interesting, we've one of our professors, Dr. Nathan Burgraff here, has done some research very similar to Lester's. He's taken that CCLI data and looked at some other issues, but yeah, that's.
And what's his name?
Nathan Burgraff, with 2 G's.
All right, I'm gonna check it out. Thank you.
Yeah, 2 G's and 2 F's.
Got it.
He was with us at the Sing conference this past year. So, and I think Lester did that study when he was at Asbury up in before he went to Duke. Chloe, last question.
This is personal, not professional, but how does everything you do and like travel and all these, like you said, next week, a week in Nashville, all that, how does that impact your like family life? And what ways do you prioritize being a mom and a wife and I guess partial caregiver with what you shared about your husband's injuries and things like that? I just want to know.
Yeah, man, thanks for even asking that. Well, one thing is it looks like bringing 4-year-olds to my Zoom call with you guys. So So with my husband's brain injury, it was looking like we weren't going, like we were struggling with infertility for years. And it was kind of at the same time that I was thinking, maybe I should try to do this music thing. And we had made the album and it just really wasn't really going anywhere, which I was fine with because I've always loved my job here at the church. And I never saw my job here at the church as a stepping stone to some worship solo career. And that's something that I'm always telling young people, like, no, the church is plan A. And if you can find opportunities outside the church to serve and to, share your music and share your songs, that's great. But it has to be an overflow of what God is doing in you on a local church level, in and through you on a local church level. Okay. But anyway, so around the same time that Blessings came out and started doing really well, we had just gotten pregnant. And it was just the weirdest timing because at the same time that I was being asked to travel more places, all of a sudden I have this child. And I think here was the key. I knew that God would not, who he was calling me to be as a minister was never going to conflict with who he's calling me to be as a mom. Mm-hmm. And so it's a lot of balancing, but so I had Josie and then we hit the road and she had gone, we toured with her first year, we had toured with Stephen Curtis Chapman. And then the spring we toured with Casting Crowns. I don't say that just to drop a bunch of people's names, but we were in 48. She had gone to 48 states by the time she was 18 months old.
Oh, wow.
And because she was my first child, I didn't know anything different. We had like a little travel pack and play and a little blender, a tiny little blender I made baby food in. And that's just what it looked like for us. And it was, even when I look back on that, it was the sweetest thing. It was the sweet. And so it looks different. It looks different every season. So very practically, I am at the church right here in my office, usually Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I get done at 3 and get my kids from school and we go hang out. And sometimes I have to hop back on email after I put them to bed just to kind of keep up. I usually take Thursdays off. Fridays, I travel 2 to 3 weekends a month. So I'll leave Friday morning. I take one, if not all the kids with me. And then we come back Saturday night and then I'm at church on Sunday. It's kind of crazy. I have a team of people that helps me with the logistics. But here's the most important thing. The guy that did our I'll stop at this, I promise, Marcus. The guy that did our premarital counseling, he said, so this was before kids, even before marriage, as my husband Martin and I were, about to get married. He said, never sacrifice your family for ministry, but always be prepared for your family to make sacrifices for ministry. And I was like, what does that even look like? So never sacrifice your family for ministry, but always be prepared for your family to make sacrifices for ministry. And I think over the years, what I've realized is when I'm dragging my kids to a 7 a.m. call time at church, I'm instilling in them that Jesus is worth us getting up early to go to church and serve him and worship him. And that will drive into their hearts more about the worth of Jesus than any talking that I would ever do as their mom.